Hey guys, welcome to another Monday morning meeting. Monday morning meeting. I like that, Stephanie. This time with Stephanie and no Rosella. Rosella's doing something. I'll probably sell in real estate. Stephanie's here with us today. However, to carry on. How's it going, Stephanie?
I'm doing well, thank you.
We're going to
Good.
continue our conversation of the NAR settlement, the National Association of Real Estate Agents. You'll remember from previous videos that there was a lawsuit against the National Association of Real Estate Agents and some other large profile real estate companies were involved there, which was ruled in favor or against, I'll say, of NAR. And recently, I think it's been within the month, maybe 2 weeks, National Association of Realtors paid $417 million as a settlement, not a small sum by anybody's standards. And so it kind of causes that issue and the confusion around that and the discussion around that to surface again. And so Stephanie and I were chatting about that earlier, and we're just going to continue our conversation here. So Steph, what do you think about that settlement, and how does it change things from your perspective?
I'm thinking I shouldn't have the smile on my face that I do when it comes to regard for this topic. But it's one that just kind of it makes me giggle slightly. It's not a light matter, as we know, and like you said, the settlement that was obviously, settled upon and will be divvied out, I think actually came from a majority of a one particular state coming together, pulling together, and making that filing. Um, and in the grand scheme and big picture of all of the things, I can't really attest to that particular state and how they're operating in business. But what I can say confidently for most and realtors that have been doing this business for some time and treat it as a business, this is not really any new news to us and how we're operating. It's honestly how most should have been and should be and will be, operating going forward.
We'll be going forward that way, that's for sure.
Yeah. So I guess to shed some light on that, I would say that there was always this conception around realtors commission and that there was a standard rate. I'm going to use that quotation mark because there is no set standard rate to what we actually get to charge when we take a listing. There was, like I said, that conception that there was a standard of a 6%. Um, as we know in the industry and with most things, you kind of give like a broad spectrum of like, here's your, speed limit. Do people go under and over? Always, of course. Depends on who you are. We also have those firms that are out there that oftentimes will market saying, we'll list your house for 1%. But again, I
Mhm.
say good marketing tactic for calls and lead generation. However, that's not exactly true either because that's not what they're truly charging. And it still boils down to the conversation per usual, which is up to the professional that you hire, which is why we always recommend that you do interview your agents, because in that discussion, at least the ones that I've always had, and with the training that I've had from being with Keller Williams, we're very big on education, not just for us as agents, but educating our consumers and also the clientele that we take on. So much as so that when you have those conversations, it should look and sound a lot like, well, Mr. Seller or Mrs. Seller, it appears that you want to sell your property. Here's what we can charge you, but here's what I'm willing to do for you. And there's a typical range. Oftentimes that comes into play based off of what are they even able to profit off of the property? What type of property or land is it that you're looking to market and sell for them? And so, again, I've never had a standard rate. I do have a standard discount that I offer to any of my friends and family because, well, those are my friends and family, and those are my repeat people, and I appreciate them. So I'm always willing to give them some sort of a cutback or a break for that. Um, but when you have that same conversation with that seller, it's also then or should be then explained that half of whatever is being collected at closing would by nature be shared at a 50% to the cooperating broker who's going to be bringing you a good qualified vetted buyer. If in the
Well,
event, oh,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
Steph. Go ahead.
And I
I
was to say,
didn't
and
mean to
if in
cut you
the
off.
event, if you are a dual agent, which is where I think sometimes this is where people may have gotten themselves into trouble, is not then fully explaining what that looks like, what that compensation looks like. And again, People are sometimes really good about shying away from conversations because they might seem uncomfortable. Again, I go to all the uncomfortable places. I don't really care. I'm going to tell you, if I end up bringing you a buyer, I'm not going to take the whole amount that we've agreed already because I just feel like that's kind of greedy. And if I'm the one who's controlling the contract from start to finish, buyer and seller, I don't need to take that full listing amount. I will gladly give them a discount again. So it goes back to the conversations that people are or are not having. And I feel like where this all came about is from not enough education going out to those sellers, but also to those buyers, because buyers were kind of sometimes unaware how their agents were even getting paid.
Quite
We'll see
unaware,
that
lots
directly
of them.
reflected within the state of Washington. But that's also not anything new either.
So
So,
let me ask you some questions around this. So did you just reference the fact that I think the state of Washington now requires that a buyer's agent have an agreement signed between them and the buyer, letting the buyer know how much the cost is for the buyer and where it's going to come from? Is that correct?
yeah, so the state of Washington kind of took it a step further to implement a new form that is required. And essentially, you need to have this signed with your buyer before you ever go out shopping.
Okay.
What that does is it just fully explains to them how you are going to be compensated for the work that you're putting in. Very rarely, except for in an extreme market like we just came off of, where buyers agents collecting from their buyers to the point where you could essentially collect a retainer, if you will, almost like an attorney. But again, that wasn't very common. I never personally did that. I didn't feel right in doing that because I knew that whatever I was going to be, showing them was obviously going to be offering a broker's compensation. But in the event, say if you had a buyer that you were going to be taking on as a client, you would want to sign that brokerage agreement stating where your compensation would be coming from if you were helping them find, say, like foreclosure properties or something that was, marketed but not on market, because those do still exist and we are still able to go and represent them. It just takes more work for us as the agent, obviously, to kind of go and get those sellers to be willing to sell to an agent. They're much harder to actually get under contract versus the ones that have already raised their hand saying, yes, I want to sell. Here's the MLS listing for you.
Now, so the listing agent will have an agreement with the seller of the
Correct.
property, and in that agreement, it's going to state whether or not the seller is willing to pay the buyer's agent commission. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And
So
it's
what
always been
happens,
that
Stephanie?
way.
Let's to give a couple of scenarios here. What happens, do you think, if the seller says, no, I'm not willing to pay a buyer's agent commission?
If that were me personally having that conversation with a seller, I would say, well, do you really want to sell your house then? Because why would you not be willing to pay somebody who's willing to come and bring you a qualified vetted buyer? Because that's the other thing. If any seller is willing to put their house on the market, they should, and very much so should be, guided to be willing to pay someone, because those are your best buyers. Those are your buyers that are ready to go. They're pre-qualified. They have an agent who's representing them. They have an agent who's out doing the work for them. So
Yeah.
again, I mean, I don't know how you're going to get a much qualified buyer than that. Um, and that really does boil down to the conversation with an agent and why an agent would ever agree to take a listing, and not agree to help pay the cooperating broker. I don't really know how that's going to go,
Yeah,
honestly.
certainly that buyer who's your first time home buyer, or potentially your VA buyer that is zero down and has
Right.
zero to put down, or your FHA client who has the minimum 3.5%, but not much more. If the seller doesn't pay the buyer's agent commission for those kind of buyers, they're not going to be able to buy the property.
Right.
That
And
seems
it's
like it would be a
not
bit of a problem. So I tend to agree with you that it seems to me what's happening here is that the settlement is going to cause things to be way more transparent, because I agree
yeah,
with you. Prior to this, a lot of agents were not explaining to their buyers how they got paid. And there was a conception, as you called it, a perception that there's a flat rate between seller and buyer that got paid, somewhere between 5 and 6% is kind of what it was. And so my expectation now, Stephanie, tell me what you think of this, is that more than likely the total commission between the buyer's agent and the seller's agent is likely to come down, and there's going to be a lot more transparency in who gets paid what and where the fees come from.
I know a lot of people would think that and assume that, which that could be true. But really, at the end of the day, what we have seen, especially in a volatile market where it becomes harder and harder to sell your house because the cost of lending is high, as we know, meaning it's not as affordable to be purchasing these homes, but you have a lot of sellers that are stuck on this high point that we just came off of. When your house sits on the market for, 120 plus days and you're not getting any movement, you're gonna have to entice someone in some way, shape, or form. And this is where we've actually seen that sellers in the past historically have been willing to pay more commission in order to get the sale done.
Sure.
So will it come down? Maybe if inventory goes up, I suppose, and you're just turning and burning transactions, but we're not seeing that, like not even in the slightest. So I would assume you might see a 1 or 2% decrease potentially, but even then, that's not really, far off from what we already do as kind of, in general. Typically, I would say for most residential listings, you're getting paid about 2 to 3%. For land listings, I've seen as high as 5% per agent. So it really just depends on what the property type is like, what the affordability is within that profit margin then that's already built in, and then what the market is doing. And I mean, agents are even more so, I think, important to make sure that you have a good agent that's representing you, whether you are the buyer or the seller, because there's a lot of mixed information that does come out there. And so you are going to be getting what you're paying for, which is agent representation. And there's been many deals that I've been party to, where thank God they had an agent representing, because I mean,
Yeah.
I could go on a list of days of all of the things that people do incorrectly or actually illegally as well. And sometimes that's even done by the agent themselves because of negligence or even code of ethics violations. There's so many different things. So I think it will help weed out the agents that do this part-time,
Mhm.
the agents that may not, have been necessarily legal savvy. And that's one thing I definitely would point out too. When you hire an agent, you're basically hiring just right below that attorney, and we are much cheaper than attorneys. I can speak from testimony. So
Yeah. Yeah, I
we're worth every
definitely
penny.
agree with you. There is a place for an agent on each side of the transaction for the people here. It's by far the safest, best way to buy real estate if you don't know what you're doing in particular, especially that 40% of buyers that are first-time home buyers this year that have never bought a home in their life, they
Right.
need representation and guidance to this process. There's no doubt about that.
The second thing I will say is, although an agent gets paid when that sale commences, that's great. But what you should also get out of what agent you hire, whether again you're the buyer or the seller's agent, is that repeat questions that are going to come in, especially for those first time home buyers or the first time home sellers or the first time estate heirs that are receiving those things. You want to have
Right.
good counsel to come back and draw on. Like I have clients that I have sold houses to years ago that will still reach out to me. Hey, Steffani, I have a question. I know I bought from you years ago. I don't know if you remember me. Well, of course I do. And then when they ask me those questions, I'm able to help guide them, either from me knowing directly or then giving them a resource to reach back out to for some of those, more convoluted type of situations. But your agent is a big role in your transaction of making sure that it all runs smoothly. And there's a lot of paperwork that does come through. So if you are and have bought without agents, which I know you have, before, but if you did not know the industry, I would not suggest going and doing that. It's one of the
Totally
largest
agree.
investments you can make and do make. So why you wouldn't
Yes.
want guidance on that, I don't really know, but there are people that do, and then they oftentimes end up having to pay in some way, shape, or form.
Agreed. That's kind of a pretty good closing statement, Stephanie. Is there anything else you want to add here on this topic?
I will say this, that as we know, the market itself, we've just been watching it, not much movement as far as those rates, coming down. I think you can probably attest to that.
Yeah.
The pricing, we're not seeing a huge swing down on that. I will say, I think days on market are lasting a little bit longer because people are kind of holding out, like I said, at that high point. And now more than ever, I would definitely educate my sellers for sure to meet with an agent that's going to give you really good, solid advice, not just what you want to hear, but the good, solid advice on how you're going to sell your property, what you need to do to sell your property, and what to truly expect. And then for those buyers, meet with an agent, because if you are a first time home buyer or even a second or even an investor, whatever you are, you can still find good equitable purchases that you can make those smart financial moves on. But it is going to require somebody who does know what they're doing and that has been in the game long enough to be able to help properly guide you. But they're still out there. It does still moving. It might not be as fast, but that's always a good thing too. Sometimes that makes for a healthier purchase or sale and kind of relationship as well. So
Yeah.
reach out to
Yeah. You
either
don't
one
like
of us
that
for
frenzied
questions.
buying. That's difficult. All right. Well,
Yeah.
as Stephanie says, go look for a good agent. And here is a good agent, I can assure you. So you'll see Stephanie's contact information there. Give her a call if you want to talk about real estate in general or specifically anything in Washington State. Stephanie can do Spokane and Deer Park are the areas that she knows really well, of course, but she knows all kinds of outside areas. I know that
Yep.
from good experience. And make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and you'll get lots more of this kind of stuff coming at you. We appreciate you guys on the YouTube channel. Thanks, Stephanie, for your time today.
Thank you as well. And thanks to all of our viewers. We appreciate you
Mhm.
guys.
Very good. Bye-bye.
Bye.